There was once a princess. She had a golden ball. She lived in a beautiful castle surrounded by a wall, and right outside the wall was a forest. Well, this princess took her golden ball every day into the forest, and she played. She threw the ball and she caught it. She threw it, she caught it. She loved this ball because it just shone like the sun. And it was the favorite thing in the whole world to her. But one day she was in the forest and she wasn't watching, because she threw the ball so high that instead of catching it, when it came down, it splashed right into a well and it sank all the way down to the bottom, and she began to cry. She sobbed and she sobbed. She cried, and she cried so long and so hard that something from the very bottom of the well came up. A little frog. Hey, Brenda! Brenda? What's the matter, Brenda? You crying? And she looked down and said, ooh, yes, I am crying. I lost my beautiful golden ball. Well, Brenda, you lost your golden ball? I'll make you a deal. If you promise to be my friend, let me sit beside you, eat off your golden plate, sleep in your bed. I'll get the ball for you. Now, the princess had some reservations. I mean, a frog is a frog. But she didn't want to get wet. And it was really slimy in that well. So she agreed to his terms. Whereupon that little frog dove into the water, got the golden ball, and threw it to her. Oh, thank you, little frog. You're my friend. You're my friend. Bye. And she ran all the way through the forest, past the gates, up the steps, into the castle, forgetting about her promise. But the frog didn't forget. Brenda, wait, I can't hop that fast. Brenda, did you forget about me? It took him all day, all night, and half the next day to get into the castle, but finally when he got there, he told everyone what she had promised to him. And her father, the king, her mother, the queen, and her sister, the other princess, and the servants all stood around looking at her. And her father, the king, said, I've always taught you that a bargain is a bargain. Now you make that frog, you be friends with that frog. And she said, Daddy, it's just a frog. But she was the princess, and he opened the doors, and they went into the dining room for a sumptuous lunch. The frog hopped in and sat underneath her chair. She picked up her golden fork and a golden knife, was beginning to cut her nice roast beef, when the frog said, Hey, Brenda, you promised me I could sit next to you. She looked at her father and said, I don't have to keep a promise to a frog, do I, Dad? Dear, a promise is a promise. Okay. And so she had to pick up the frog. It was cold. It was slimy. It was disgusting. She picked it up and put it right beside her, but she tried not to let her thigh touch it. Then she picked up her fork and was just ready to take a bite when the frog said, Brenda, you promised me I could eat off your golden plate. She looked at her mother. Dear, you heard what your father said. A promise is a promise, okay? So she had to pick up the frog, but it was really slimy and disgusting and cold. And then she put it right by her golden plate. And the frog jumped into her mashed potatoes, dove into the Jell-O pudding, slurped up the food, spun around in the spinach. It was disgusting. So she got up to leave. As she was just pushing her chair underneath the table, the frog said, Princess, wait! You promised me I could sleep in your bed. She looked at her father. She looked at her mother, and then her sister jumped up and said, A promise is a promise. And so she had to pick up the little frog. But there was spinach dangling from its foot, and a pea rolled out of its mouth, and there was pudding all over it. It was unspeakably bad. But she took up that little frog, walked away, walked up the stairs, waved to everyone, opened the door, and then closed it, and then put the frog down in the corner. And said, "Ooh, ooh, ooh." Then she went over to her bed, pulled back the cover, and said, "I need a little nap. It's been a hard day." Rita, you promised me I could sleep in your bed. And if you don't put me up there, I'll tell your mommy, and I'll tell your daddy, and I'll tell your sisters, and you know what they'll say. She flew into a rage. And she said, "Okay, a promise is a promise, but a frog is just a frog, and you're a disgusting little amphibian." And then she grabbed the frog, and with all of her strength, she threw it against the wall. Yeah, there was a big thud. A splat. And then the whole room was engulfed in smoke. And when the smoke dissipated and disappeared, there, standing where the frog had been thrown, was a prince. He was handsome. He was good looking. He was well built. He knelt down and said, "Oh, princess, you just broke the spell by throwing you against the wall?" And he said, "Yes, that's what did it." And then he took her hand. He kissed her hand. And he kissed her wrist. He kissed her all the way up to her elbow. She liked his eyes. She liked his smile. She liked his manners. Then she looked back at her satin sheets and looked at his eyes and said, "A promise is a promise." The next morning, she brought her prince downstairs to meet her family, and her father was mystified and said, "What kind of a deal was this?" Her mother was just surprised, but her sister jumped up and said, "Where did you say that well was?" Now, you probably have heard this story about the frog prince, yes? You probably heard that she kissed him, right? Yeah. Wrong. You look in the library, in the Grimm's Brothers. She threw him against the wall. That's what did it. And the moral to the story is, sometimes it takes an angry woman to turn a little frog into a prince.